Now, if you have been following this case, you know that former Trump Chief of Staff Mark Meadows has been trying to get his criminal trial moved from state court into federal court. Mr. Meadows claimed that all of the alleged criminal activity he was accused of in Fulton County, all of that was actually just part of his duties as chief of staff to the president. And since the chief of staff is a federal official, Meadows and his lawyers reason that he should be tried in federal court. Now, Meadows surprised everyone when he took the stand for over 4 hours last month, testifying that he never did anything in Georgia on behalf of Donald Trump personally or on behalf of Trump's presidential campaign. He said he was only ever acting in his official duties as a member of Trump's White House staff. Had Meadows succeeded in getting his case moved to federal court, it would have been a huge win for him, and it would have meant that the jury in this case would not have been selected from Fulton County, Georgia, a county that Joe Biden won overwhelmingly in 2020. But Mr. Meadows did not succeed in this effort. In his ruling, Judge Steve Jones wrote, "The court concludes that Meadows has not met even the quite low threshold for removal." The judge then went on to essentially wave away Meadows' claims that he was simply carrying out his duties as chief of staff. Take this example. During his testimony, again last month, Mr. Meadows was asked about a text message he sent to a Georgia elections official in which he essentially offered to have the Trump campaign pay for part of the Georgia recount effort. Meadows wrote in that text, "Is there a way to speed up Fulton County's signature verification in order to have results before January 6th if the Trump campaign assists financially?" Now, remember, Mr. Meadows was trying to claim here that he was acting as White House chief of staff, not as a member of the Trump campaign when he sent that. On the stand, Mr. Meadows explained that text was in keeping of me trying to ask a person who should know whether it's a financial resource issue, manpower issue or whatever. So I wasn't speaking on behalf of the campaign. Judge Jones found this not credible. The court determines, as a matter of fact, making a request to the Georgia Secretary of State's office regarding a possibility that the Trump campaign could provide financial resources to fund the recount effort, even if not directly on behalf of the campaign, is still campaign-related political activity. Mr. Meadows also testified about his mysterious surprise visit to the Cobb County Convention Center, where Georgia officials were conducting the audit of Georgia's vote. And Mr. Meadows asserted that that, too, was somehow part of his official White House duties. This is how Mr. Meadows explained that in his testimony last month. "What I did was go to the Cobb County Convention Center to look at the process that they were going through. And in doing so, was trying to, again, check that box to say, all right, everything is being done right here. And so if there's allegations of fraud, we need to move on to something else." And here's what the judge had to say about that one. The court factually finds that Meadows overseeing state election recount processes related to President Trump's reelection campaign. In other words, nice try, Mr. Meadows. That's not federal work. The ruling goes on like this, with Judge Jones just not buying what Mark Meadows was selling, that his involvement in the phone call between Donald Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger was somehow federal work, that his arrangement of a call between Trump and another Georgia elections official was, again, somehow federal work, that a meeting with a Michigan state official was, again, federal work. Judge Jones was not agreeing with any of that. In fact, the only thing Mr. Meadows is accused of doing that Judge Jones finds was within his duties as chief of staff was the fact that Mr. Meadows sent a text message to Republican Congressman Scott Perry. As Judge Jones writes near the end of this ruling, Meadows was required to come forward with competent proof of his factual contention that his allegations, his actions involving challenges to the outcome of the Georgia presidential election results were within his role as chief of staff. His efforts fall short. Tonight, just before we got on the air, lawyers for Mr. Meadows told the court that they plan to appeal this ruling. Joining me now are former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neal Katyal and Melissa Redmond, former prosecutor in the Fulton County DA's office and now a professor of law at the University of Georgia School of Law. Neal and Melissa, thanks for making the time. Neal, I know you have some thoughts on this based on your social media activity. So let me just first ask you how strong an appeal is on this ruling.
Weak, very, very weak. This decision by Judge Jones is 49 pages long. It's very thorough. It's not surprising in a way, Alex, because I think anyone who understands how the removal statute works knows that this motion has always been a long shot. And Meadows and Trump filed it Meadows filed it anyway, and I suspect with Trump's blessing, because Meadows and Trump are scared of one thing, and it's not the jury. I think what you were talking about before matters, but I think the real thing is they are afraid of the American public seeing this trial play out on cameras so that the American public and the world can see it. In federal court, there are generally no cameras, which is why I think they really want this to be in federal court. But to be in federal court, as you were saying, Alex, there's got to be federal work involved. And Judge Jones meticulously, page after page, explains there ain't no federal work. The Constitution actually cuts the executive branch out, he says, of decisions over election fraud when it comes to presidential elections, for good reason. You don't want the president, an incumbent president, to use all of their powers in ways to try and keep themselves in office, which is what Trump and Meadows were trying to do here.